Hey guys, and welcome to Anchor to Truth. Tonight we are here with our special guest Sean Griffin from Kingdom and Context, and tonight we are diving into our second half of our 11 through 20 Jubilee study. So welcome, Sean. We're glad to have you again. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great. Appreciate you guys having me. I think
Abs-
this is a lot of fun. This is a great book to review.
Absolutely. And as always, joined by my brother Joe Christmas up above. And over here is brother Jonathan. Hello, hello.
Howdy.
Shalom.
All right, so tonight we are going to finish up this 10 chapter section. I think we're going to be starting in 16 because we've covered 11 through 15. But let me just ask you guys real quick, right off the bat, we'll jump right into it. Was there any hot topics or big points? Was there anything that we missed, or is there anything we need to reiterate from the previous chapters before we get into the next section?
I think it would benefit the audience to remember that chapter 11 of Jubilees, it does reiterate what chapter 10 talks about, and this is something I think Christians are sorely lacking in their understanding of spirits and demons and Satan himself. Is that the book of Jubilees refers to Satan as his character Mastema, and then he is the one that is a ruler over other unclean spirits who sends them out to do his bidding. And so this is where we see that throughout the rest of the scriptures. You know, the demons are subject to somebody, and that they go out to do his bidding. And even though we as believers have authority and can take authority over them, as Christ has exemplified and taught, this is still the hierarchy of how it works, basically. So these unclean spirits come from the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim from before the flood, and this is where it comes from. So you don't get that information in the traditional canon of 66. A lot of churches will teach that demons are actually angels themselves, but that wouldn't be my conclusion from the book of Jubilees or from First Enoch or from the Testament of 12 Patriarchs. It's that we're actually the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim from before the flood.
So you're saying they're not just all out there running amok. There's a structure, there's an order to them. They have a ruler over them, and they have a specific goal in mind, kind of thing.
That's right. They are, and not only do they have to abide by their hierarchy, but it seems as if people who are walking in the commandments and the strength of God, of his ways, they have some sort of immediate authority over them. And I don't know how that works, to be honest with you. I don't know how. I've never seen a verse explain how that was like programmed into them to where, you know, they will flee from you. But it works. Christ taught it. He did it. But it definitely works. I just don't know a specific verse on like why that happens every time. Even with Satan himself. I mean, he fled from Christ. Christ was remaining righteous, remaining without error. He did not fall into temptation that was being offered to him by Satan, and Satan fled from him. So we have that same wonderful power as disciples of Christ. You know, we resist the devil and he will flee.
Amen.
Yeah, I think what comes up there is like you're looking at these two different kingdoms. They're warring kingdoms. You know, you're going to fall under one or the other. And when we choose to follow under God's kingdom, Yahweh, Yeshua, Savior, and all that, then we're commanded to follow his ways and to do his things, to live in his kingdom. And if you want to go be on the other side, then you have to do the things that the world's doing. And that's why that's a wide road versus a narrow road conversation. And you see all that play out. And like Kyle, you said it perfectly, like they have a structure and a leadership that they have to follow. They don't really get a choice. They're not like saying, "Oh, I'm going to switch back to the good side." You know, they're over there now. They've already set their eternal destination and all that, right? They have no soul that can be redeemed, so that's why they're going to be thrown into the lake of fire. But they're under that structure, so they have to follow, right? And we're under the Father's structure, and we have to follow. And it's such an interesting concept how one knows their place, and then, you know, a lot of times on our side, under the Father's kingdom, we don't always know our place. We don't always understand that. Well, if we're going to be under His kingdom, we have to follow His kingdom rules and live in the structure that's set up for us. The demons know how to follow their structure. Sometimes we don't know how to follow our structure. And I think that's a really interesting way to kind of look behind the curtain on some of that.
Yeah, amen.
So with this hierarchy that's spoken of, with this order that's there for the other kingdom, and these extra biblical books, right, outside of the canon of 66, it gives us a lot deeper insight into not only where they come from, but what they do, how they do it, their purpose. For someone who is a part of this movement that seems to be very prevalent nowadays, everybody seems to be getting into a little bit of this deliverance aspect of some deliverance aspect of ministry in some way, shape, form, or fashion. So for those people who are doing those kinds of things, my opinion, I guess, would be that they're kind of behind the eight ball on this, and not very well equipped if they're not at least starting by looking into these extra biblical texts, giving them some foundation of understanding what they're dealing with. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
Well, I will say this right off the rip. If you ask the average person, is a demon and an angel the same thing? What I've come to find out, especially on the church side, oh yeah, demon and angel, same thing. A demon is a fallen angel. And I'm like, okay, the conversation needs to go a little bit further. And I explained to them out of the book of Enoch, and they just look at me like, well, I've never didn't know that. So the whole time you thought you were battling a fallen angel or dealing with a fallen angel, when you're actually dealing with a demon, a disembodied spirit. And just knowing, to me, if you're going to go to battle with something, it's good to know what you're actually battling. And it's good to kind of like have that, and at least going into that. And so that conversation needs to be had more and more. And then when we kick out these books, when we kick out Jubilees, we kick out the book of Enoch, we lose so much information that we need. And it's kind of like what you're saying, Kyle, about, being behind the eight ball. If the whole time you thought you're dealing with this, but you're really not, and you're realizing you're probably not fighting an angel, you're fighting a demon, that changes the whole game plan to me.
Yeah, I would agree.
All right, so no, nothing additional to say on that.
Well,
All right.
I would, but it would be another hour.
That's kind of where I was at. I was like, yeah, should I dig in?
Okay. Well, if I need to think that out.
I think these chapters are amazing. 11 through 15, we start to get more and more validation to Jubilee 6 about these new moon festivals that were announced, the first of the first month, the 4th, the 7th, and the 10th month. Because we see, in chapter 12, Yahweh is speaking to Abraham on the new moon of the 7th month. You see in chapter 13, I don't think there's one in chapter 13, but in chapter 14 on the new moon of the 3rd month. And then also he celebrates festival Shavuot. And I think it's amazing. And we're about to see it here in chapter 16, another inference that something significant is happening on these new moons, not just the priestly, but also the quarterly.
Awesome. Well, with that said, why don't you go ahead and take us into what you're talking about there, Sean? What verses would you like to look at?
Yeah, just the first verse of chapter 16.
Okay.
It says, the new moon of the 4th month, we appeared unto Abraham at the oak of Mamre. We talked with him. We announced him that a son would be given to him by Sarah's wife. Now this, of course, he moved back here in chapter, I think, 14. He moved back to this area after he left Egypt, and now he's back near Shechem. He's living in Shechem between Bethel and Ai. So we see Bethel, that's the place where they put the tabernacle later after the days of Moses and Joshua. Ai, that's one of the cities that we see in the conquest of Canaan in the book of Joshua. And so here's all this significant area that he's living in. And this is right close to Selah, where he tithed to the Melchizedek. So this is a very significant area that it seems like a unique mix of people that are following Yahweh and people that are not. And so you have the, people that are worshiping the ways of Baal and Dionysus and all the foreign gods. And then there's people that are trying to worship Yahweh in truth and faithfulness. And then Yahweh is sending angelic messengers. The we in this part here, I think, is important because that's the same we that chapter 1 tells us is the angel speaking to Moses on Mount Sinai, the same one that was in the burning bush.
Right.
So this angel, he even says, I think it was chapter 15, he's the one that says, I'm the one that showed up and announced this to Abraham and Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
Because this whole conversation, just context alert, this whole conversation is Moses on Mount Sinai speaking with angels.
Right.
And this angel that's talking is telling him, oh yeah, all these patriarchs, your forefathers, Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, I appeared to them too. I'm the same guy. And no, I don't think this is a pre-incarnate Jesus Christ. What do you guys think?
No, I would absolutely agree. That's pre-context, pre-in-depth study. I would say, yeah, that was. I did think that was a pre-incarnate Yeshua back in the day. But the more studied I get, the more I see over and over again that was not the case. So, no, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I really don't have a whole lot to add on that. I'd just say, yeah, that's spot on.
Yep, I would agree.
Yeah, I think we actually get that verse. I believe it's in Acts 7:38. It says, "This is the one, Moses, who was in the congregation in the wilderness with the angel who spoke to him at Mount Sinai, and with him our fathers, he receiving living oracles to give to us." So we even see that span the New Testament, right? This isn't let's get confused and have no idea what we're talking about. Let's try to make up a new story and a new character that's involved. Even in Acts, they're saying we fully understand it was an angel that showed up and talked to Moses, and that's how he got all this information. He clearly wasn't there at creation or any of the stuff that happened before he was alive. He had to have figured this stuff out somehow. And when it tells you it was an angel, well, it was an angel. So I think that really helps us to understand a little bit and to give us some of that, as we're talking about, some of that context, some of the better understanding of what our Bible's actually saying and where these first 5 books in the canon came from in the first place, right? When you have a group of people that deny angels, yet angels are where they got their information from, that makes for an awkward conversation.
Yeah, there are actually there's some groups that would actually take that scripture and apply that to the idea that it was Yeshua in the bush, to apply that to Yeshua and say that pre-incarnate that Yeshua was an angel. And there are even groups out there that believe that I want to say it's the Archangel Michael, that's who they believe Yeshua was pre-incarnate.
So he was able to change his state and order of who he was? He went from a son to an angel back to a son?
Mm-hmm. Apparently.
Yeah.
Apparently.
Yeah.
There's some wonky theories. Again, just another reason why you take these books out and you got huge plot holes that people just start to have to patchwork in some guesswork, and it gets weird. It's really weird.
Yep.
So we were talking about the moons a minute ago, and I've Sean, I'm kind of in the same understanding where you're at. I remember reading that that cycle of 1, 4, 7, and 10 for the new moons, but elsewhere in Jubilees we also read, like you said, in the 3rd month and other places like that. So is it the 4 that are significant or celebrated, and then there's also just a regular new moon that happened in other months, or how does that really kind of play out for us if we're trying to study that and maybe help build some calendar information?
I don't know about building a calendar. I was just, the only reason I mentioned the new moon of the 3rd month was like I talked about last video, whereas that is the difference between the priestly new moons versus the quarterly new moons that helps you determine the seasons of the calendar.
Gotcha.
So the priestly new moons was the 1st of every month, and that's what we see in Numbers, Deuteronomy. They had special sacrifices they did on those days. So the point is, every time you see this word new moon showing up, Abraham, Jacob, Noah, whoever's in the storyline, they're a priest. They're doing a sacrifice on that day. So it's like angels show up and venerate the sacrifice. So like, you're worshiping Yahweh, you're doing it right. Here's a message from the Lord. He sends his messengers to give it to you. It's some pretty good confirmation that you're on the right track.
I think what else we see there is when we're talking about the new moons here in Jubilees, the distinction and the difference we have from our canon is, if you're depending on your translation of the scripture, most of those times where it says new moon, it actually means new month, according to that Hebrew word, where here we're actually reading new moon is new moon, so we do have a reference back to the moon. So I know it's been passed around and tossed all over the place, but moon is good, right? There's no, we're trying to get rid of it or remove it in any sense at all. It's just, where it says moon, let it be moon, and where it says month, let it be month. And luckily for us here in Jubilees, each of these moons are actually referring to the new moon, the new month, that time counting period. I think that's
Right.
interesting for us to look into.
It becomes tricky because the word in Hebrew for moon is the word month. Vice versa, I should say. The word that is translated as month, it comes from the root word moon. So that's where you have the arguments come up and it gets tricky. And that's where I've heard people contest that the modern translations of Jubilees have done the same thing, where they'll take that same word, I think it's Kodesh, and they use it to translate it as a month or a moon, depending on the translator's understanding or preference. But ultimately, thankfully, regardless of whether you want to call it a month or a moon, regardless of how you want to do that, we do get the inclinations of every 91 days that lines up with Enoch from Jubilees chapter 6. You get the idea of the quarterly, right? So you don't get the priestly. That's why I inserted that, just from me understanding Numbers and Deuteronomy. I inserted the priestly every month for the priest to do a specific sacrifice. But the average person isn't encouraged to observe the monthly priestly sacrifice. The average person is encouraged to observe what Jubilee 6 talks about, which is these quarterly new moon celebrations. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I was reading through Leviticus, and it actually we were doing that study before, and it had the daily sacrifice, the weekly sacrifice, and the monthly sacrifice, which were all different and distinct from each other. So yeah, that actually really helps to identify what that was, because if that monthly was either all over the place or had shifting requirements and everybody was meant to do it, it would throw in some wrenches. So I think that we would know the first of every month. Now it makes a lot more sense of why the Bible and Leviticus actually had them set up that format. Because it was for the priest. So yeah, that makes perfect sense.
And remember, Jubilees is a work unto itself as we have it today. And what I mean by that is, like, we do not know, like, if we believe Jubilees is what it claims to be. It claims to be Moses on Mount Sinai receiving these words and writing it down, chapter 1, verse 28 through 30. If that's true, and I believe it's true, then there is no how do I say this? There is no historical place anywhere that tells us, oh, well, then Moses took this specific group and made it its own book, and then he rewrote Genesis and he rewrote Leviticus and he wrote Exodus. Because Jubilee, at the end of Jubilees, it goes into the same information we get in Exodus, the beginning of Exodus.
Right.
So it's like but when you do look into what the rabbis did in the first century AD, is they wanted to show that they didn't want Jubilees associated with their canon. So they would have to take the information out. But if you chronologically put the information into Genesis through Deuteronomy, this, to me, you would put this in Exodus 24. Because this is the moment he went up the mountain and had a whole conversation about all this stuff. So you would put this in Exodus 24. So then by the time you read all of Jubilees, you get all this prefacing, if you will. Now, that's not being a strict chronological literalist, if I could put it like that. That's saying if I kept the book of Jubilees as it is, and I found where's the most appropriate chronological place within Genesis through Deuteronomy that it would fit, it would be Deuteronomy 24 or Exodus 24:11. And then after that, you start getting all these random, and I say random, but you start getting all these instructions given to you about how to build the breastplate, the priesthood garments, the temple, the tabernacle, the poles, the altars, everything, the incense. You get all this information, this detailed information, but this gives you storyline as far as like Moses having a conversation with the angel. Like he went up there, he saw the angels of God, then he went up there, and then it just jumps to all this random detailed information with no explanation of like, oh, and then it just tells you all this stuff all the way up to chapter 40, right? And then it kind of like backtracks a little bit. Exodus 31 reviews the Sabbath again. Exodus 35 reviews the Sabbath again. Then he goes back into more details, and you're like, well, that's kind of interesting. Like, is this what they talked about up there the whole time? Yes, it is. But there's a practical conversation having here as well, right? Because, every other instance in the scriptures when an angel shows up, there's like practical, it's like a real life conversation. You know what I'm saying? It's like the other angels that showed up with Abraham and Sarah, they had a meal with them and sat with them for approximately 4 to 6 hours. Like, you're not just, you're not just sitting there in silence waiting for them to open their mouth and give you some unique detail. about how to build something. Like there's a
Right.
practical conversation there, you know. Sarah apparently felt so comfortable she chuckled when they gave her the promise. That takes a level of comfort. You've been around this person for so long. Like we joked about last video, Abraham recognized the guys showing up
Yep.
because it's the same dude. he knew
Right.
he knew to bow down. Like he knew who this guy is. It's the guy talking in Jubilees, right? So it's this angel. And who is this angel? I would only speculate. I don't know his name, but it's the same person. And so this is what I'm getting at is like, if we were to put this in a chronology, a loose chronology, you would understand that the priestly new moons were a supplement to these quarterly new moons, because you would have Jubilees in the middle of Genesis through Deuteronomy. And so therefore you'd have all the books put together. So like, you know, if we're not just take this, you know, tongue in cheek, guys, just, you know, take it with a grain of salt. If I was not adhering to Judaism's version of the Old Testament, and this was like, you know, 2nd century BC, and I just had a bunch of scrolls, and I'm trying to figure out, oh, I want to make a collection that's the most coherent timeline to introduce ideas, you know, I would have 7 books of quote unquote Torah and not 5. It would be 1st Enoch, Genesis, Jubilees, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. I'd have 7 Torah books that I would label the Torah, and then go into the prophets and the histories, the Ketuvim. So, but that, you know, we're not making cannons around here, but but I'm just saying, think about it. Like these are just men who compiled these and called these in segments that they wanted to call them. They chose to call these 5 books the Torah, and the rest along the prophets, the Ketuvim, and the writings and all that kind of stuff. So like that's their tradition. Right. There's no divine oracle from an angel saying this is how you divide up the scriptures. So I'm just saying, like, this information, it like has pieces of Genesis, pieces of Exodus, and it's beautiful. And it has the fuller conversation that we don't get in Exodus when Moses actually went to the mountain. So as a result of that, it is weird to me when I get to Numbers 29 and I see, oh, they're doing new moon festivals for the priests, or new moon observances for the priests and special sacrifices. But otherwise in Jeremiah and Isaiah and other places, I see them talking about quarterly new moons. And Samuel and David are having a festival with Jonathan for one of the new moon celebrations at the beginning of the month. And it's not for priests. It's for them to observe.
Right.
And they're not priests. They're observing a new moon from Jubilee 6. But yet without Jubilees, you're like, why are they doing this? What's the big deal here? You know?
Yeah, and I think that's the reason. And I'm not trying to take this back to a calendar topic, but I think that's one of the reasons that these are proof texts, and that's one of the reasons why people do get into those errors of looking at the new moon as being the beginning of a new month rather than having their standalone purposes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, if these books would have been left in, I honestly don't think we would be having any of the counter debates that we're having anyway.
That's right.
I mean,
but Joe, that is literally the historically documented reason why this book was taken out, was over the calendar. 1st Enoch, Jubilees, Testament 12, they were taken out specifically for 2 big reasons. One was the disagreement on the calendar observances, and the other one was that these books were being used as supplemental proof for Christians to believe in Christ.
Yep.
So because the rabbinical Pharisees of the day, they wanted to follow the lunar cycle, and then the Zadoks had followed the solar cycle, which matches these books.
I have not heard, as far as anyone arguing against the Book of Jubilees, I have not heard a legitimate argument personally against the Book of Jubilees at all that was able to stand up if what was being claimed was read in context. So I haven't heard any legitimate claim against Jubilees except those that are arguing from the standpoint of calendar. But they're having to take their pre-assumption, their position that they already previously held about what is an accurate calendar, to make those decisions about Jubilees, rather than just, okay, let's determine our understanding based on what it's saying. that's the excuse that's used for this not being scripture, is because it doesn't line up with their understanding of what a calendar is, when this gives
Right.
so much more depth to understanding what the other scriptures say. I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to
Well,
me.
I'll give you one more, and it's something that I feel like I'm led to teach on at some point. There's an ignorance in our walk, and that ignorance is the canon of 66. Because that is the other argument people have. Well, it's not in the 66, so it ain't in there, so I'm not I don't believe anything else because it's not in the 66. And that tells me immediately that you haven't looked into your 66 canon and realized that, like you said earlier, Sean, this wasn't something that I feel like God ordained and said, okay, put these 66 books together and that's it.
Right.
We know that if you go back to the 1611 King James, guess what? It's all in there.
Yeah.
So then, what becomes your canon now? Are we going to stick with the 66, or do we want to go with the 1611 King James? I mean, so where are you going to draw the line at? And so, to me, and I don't mean this in a mean way. I really do not. If you're listening, I don't mean this in a mean way. Ignorance doesn't mean you're stupid. Ignorance just means you don't understand something. That's all. And so, and I was there, like a lot of us, where, if it wasn't in my Bible, if it just, it's not in the 66, and it just gets thrown out. Now, I'm not knocking the 66 that we have at all. I am very thankful that we have the 66. The problem is that men have went in to manipulate the information that we should have had a long time ago, that would have squashed a lot of arguments a long time ago. And so that, to me, Kyle, that's the second argument. Other than calendar, it's people are stuck on the 66 and can't get their mind unstuck from it.
That's why I've been jokingly referring to it lately as just the modern edited canon, the modern American edited canon.
I like that.
Yeah,
I like
because
that.
it's not even the same as it used to be in its own history, its own immediate history. 140 years ago, it had more books, just even in our American canon.
Not to mention all the parenthetical additions that are in the 66 itself.
Right.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, 16 is a big chapter, guys. 16 is a really cool chapter. We got angelic visitations. You got in this conversation, of course, is the same moment where then these angels leave and go destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and they rescue Lot and his two daughters. So there's a lot going on here in this chapters.
Yeah, I mean, we were kind of already talking about calendar, which this is not going that direction. But what's funny is we actually see in verse 20 where it talks about Abraham building an altar and doing a festival of joy. And this is a 7-day feast and festival, all this really cool stuff. And, we come to find out this is the Feast of Tabernacles. He's building booths. He's going around the altar. He's doing everything that the Bible that we know of is prescribing perfectly. And then, it tells us then that he was the first one to ever do it on earth, right? He got this, as we call it, type and shadow from something that was already in the heavenlies, but he's learning how to do it, and he's doing it for the first time on earth. And I think that's an amazing story, one, to see that it's not we don't have to wait till Mount Sinai to figure this out, and that Abraham can hear from the Spirit, hear from the angel of presence, hey, this is what I want you to do. This is why I want you to do it. And you don't see Abraham complaining or asking any questions or like, did you really mean I have to do this? Or I got to take off work. This is really inconvenient. He's just saying, hey, if I'm going to be in the Father's will and I'm going to do what he wants me to do, then by all means, go get me some unhewn stones. Let's figure this thing out and let's go build ourselves some booths. And I love that story. I love the fact that we're seeing Bible feasts show up so early. I love the fact that Abraham, that has a heart for God, called a friend of God, is the one who gets to essentially institute the practice for us. And we can go back and use this as a model, an additional model, one that we don't really have from the canon of 66. We were reading through it and during our study, and just all the different aspects of it, of what the things they put on the altar and the things they were burning and the different oils and all, just so many cool things. It sounds like such a good time. Right. And I think sometimes we really minimize it in our world today and say, well, it's just a temporary dwelling, so I'm going to go to Disneyland. And you're like, well, I don't know if that's exactly what it was talking about, but at least it's better than just, working and staying at home, I guess. So I loved seeing Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot show up here in 20 and down.
Well, if I may, right? I mean, before you get to 20, you got them celebrating Shavuot for Isaac's birthday. So this is this is not the first time we've seen him celebrate Shavuot, but it's actually, this one is on Isaac's birthday when he's born. He's born in the middle of the 3rd month, and there's a festival that he's enjoying. And to me, it seems like there's some time that's passed in the whole narrative of 16, because the opening verse, you've got the new moon of the 4th month. And then you get down after Sodom and Gomorrah is destroyed. Now we're celebrating Isaac's birthday in the middle of the 3rd month. So now an entire 11 and a half months have passed.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
at
then
least.
at the end, they're celebrating Tabernacles, which would be another several months. So you got some time passing in this narrative. But what's amazing is after Isaac is born, you get one of the first prophecies of Christ,
Mhm.
Mm.
talking about the seed that will come from him.
Yep.
I can't remember what verse that's in.
That is in 18.
It's
Wait,
is it in 18?
wait, excuse me. No, I'm sorry.
You scroll up a little bit on the. There you go, 18. For he should become the portion of the Most High, and all his seed had fallen into possession of Elohim. Or no, it's in 17. Isn't it?
No, it's 17. Yeah.
But from the sons of Isaac, one should become a holy seed and should not be reckoned among the Gentiles.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Do you believe that Yeshua was born at this time as well, or do you think he was born in the fall feast?
In this
mean
time, yeah. I
A
honestly
lot
don't
of
know.
people believe that Isaac and Yeshua were born at the same time, or not the
Oh,
same
like
year, of course, but
same
during the
time of
time
year.
of Shavuot. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be pretty amazing if he was born on Shavuot. I wouldn't put it past him being born on a Sabbath in general, since he was raised on the Sabbath. But I wouldn't put it past his first birth through the womb to be on a Sabbath. That'd be pretty amazing. So I don't know. It'd be guesswork for me, brother. I don't have a specific scripture.
When do you think Yeshua was born? What is
Are
your
you-
personal opinion, Ennio?
Like time of year or
Yeah, the time
year?
of the year, because there's
Okay.
people who say he was born in the spring, and there's people who say he was born in the fall. There's other, they will say that he's born, that him and Isaac's a type and shadow of Yeshua. So there's a lot of people who believe that Yeshua was actually born the same time of the year as Isaac.
Again, I don't have a specific verse to go off of, so it's all guesswork, and I don't know. I know it's highly debated because of people are so adamant against early Christian traditions that honored his birth. But if you go back to the 2nd century AD, there's some group of Christians that honored his birth on January 6th. So if you did 9 months previous to that, it would be, sometime in the spring. So I think it's the Ethiopians even they also celebrate January 6th as the actual date of his birth. So what I mean by that is the Hebrews, they calculated that the person first being birthed when they were conceived.
Yes.
Yeah. So his conception would be in the spring. His expulsion from the womb would be January 6th. That's just guesswork going off of earliest tradition I've ever heard or researched.
I've never heard that before, January 6th, but
yeah, it's not December 25th. It's that came later.
Of course not.
It's January 6th is what many early Christian communities celebrated the birth of Christ.
Okay.
The birth through the womb of Mary. But the Hebrews would have said, oh, well, he's, when he's conceived, that's when we start counting.
Okay.
We also have this concept of Yeshua being born and the wise men basically showing up moments after, kind of thing. And was there some time between the birth and the time that the wise men actually showed up? Was there months that passed by?
Those years.
Was there years that passed by?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there could be a lot of speculation there. I mean, was it before they went to Egypt or after they got back?
Yeah. So lots of assumptions are made in those guesses. I think. I don't think that I've seen anything that is specific. I think there's some really good assumptions, some really good guesses, but I haven't seen anything. I've heard good arguments for just about every one of the feasts, and I've heard good arguments for his return on pretty much every one of the feasts. Right. So I mean, there's just so much out there to speculate on. So I don't know either.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, our late brother Rob Skiba, the studies he did, he believed that using stellarium that he was born on September 11th, according to the Gregorian calendar.
Right.
That was very interesting to me. That was like, wow, because if the enemy was going to pick a day to do something, then that was the day they're going to pick. So, anyway.
I will say this too. A recent video that Ken Heidebrick did, he had a guest on that was speaking to the calendar, and he was looking at the intercalation days. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but the guy that had the menorah, and he was using that
Mhm.
to show the intercalation. Okay.
Mhm.
I think if we can do some backtracking, if we can back that up, it can help us pinpoint a more specific date of crucifixion. And if by doing so, that should help us nail down a more specific time for birth, at least by year. And if hopefully that might give us a little more insight too as to what season that was actually in as well. So just a thought. So for any of you guys that nerd out on doing that kind of stuff, help us out on that. We need somebody to calculate all that stuff.
You have opened up your comments to paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. Just to let
Bring
you
it
know.
on, bring it
As
on.
long as it's out of love, we're good.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Very cool.
Last thing in 16, this is a lot of people take issue with Jubilees because of some of the wording in here. They don't understand. Just as we talked about the seed of the Holy One to come, they also take issue with the idea of how it talks about Lot and his daughters and the seed of Lot being rooted out in the earth in the day of judgment. And this is where I would just try to remind folks that the idea of the seed being a allegorical reference to your obedience and not a genealogical reference. We also see that in the canon of 66. We see that in Genesis, we see that in Galatians, see it in Romans. So this is not something that is saying all the descendants of Lot, which should be the Ammonites and the Moabites, that every single one of them was always going to be doomed, like it's some sort of Calvinism, like they're just destined to die, and they've just been predetermined because of Lot's sin, right? Because what Ezekiel tells us that the Yeshua does not, condemn the son for the father's sins. That's not Torah, right? So this is where they'll come in this argument against Jubilee 16. They'll say, well, look, this is against Torah because it's claiming that, the descendants of Lot, they're in his whole seed is going to be rooted out and none of them will get salvation. But they're talking about, it's in context of the sin he committed with his daughters.
Yes.
So, and this sin is also referenced as a quote unquote ways of the nations in Leviticus 18 through 20, as it starts outlining all this incestual behavior between family members. So this is why I just kind of remind people of the overall context of what's being said here. It's not talking about just anyone born as a long-standing descendant of Lot's children that birthed from this moment, that they don't have salvation. It's just saying the seed of this behavior. And that's in the same way that it's referencing in the same chapter, the seed of Isaac's behavior, which is righteousness, will lead to a holy people that are set apart from the Gentiles. It's also referring to this bad behavior of Lot that he committed with his daughters, and anyone that's involved in that will be rooted out in the day of judgment. Mm-hmm. So just like in John chapter 8, when Jesus tells us that if you were of your father Abraham, you do the deeds of Abraham. And what was their complaint that made him say that? They said, we are of the children, the seed of Abraham. That was the claim of the Pharisees.
Yep.
And he's like, no, you're not. No, you're not, because you would do the deed of Abraham. Abraham didn't try to kill me. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Right.
I'm paraphrasing, but go read all of John chapter 8. But that's the context there, is they knew that seed equals behavior.
Right.
And this is where it's juxtaposing the bad behavior of Lot and his daughters versus the good behavior of Isaac that's going to bring about the Messiah to come.
I am kind of hesitant, but also very glad you brought that up, because I know we don't need to necessarily get off on this subject, but that concept of seed and how you phrase that, I think that gives a lot more explanation. Maybe we need to do a video on that one day, because I personally don't follow the idea of the serpent seed line of thought, right? In the way that that's understood and taught. I think it completely goes against what we see in Scripture, but there are some that really hold to that. So I think the understanding of the concept of seed and what that means needs to be explained a whole lot more. Again, I don't want to really go down that rabbit hole right now, but did you have any thoughts on that real quick, Sean? Or anybody?
Yeah, debate. I did a whole debate. I have a 2-part video on my channel about debunking serpent seed, and Jubilees was a huge source text from the scriptures I pulled from that debunks serpent seed.
Very cool.
So that would be my quick summation, but without going into like all the bullet points. It's serpent seed is a deterministic hermeneutic view. It is basically saying certain people are born doomed and others are not.
Mm.
Right.
Right.
And so it's not scriptural in my opinion.
Well, it kind of throws out the whole John 3:16 if you're going to take that approach.
Right.
Yeah. They left the whosoever becomes a word that doesn't mean what it says.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Or
Do
that
you-
all men might be saved.
right.
Unless you're part of Lot's seed, and not so much.
Yep.
Right.
Well, I got something I wanted to dive into for a minute on chapter 16. I know we've kind of been all over the place here a little bit, but something backing up over here, starting in verse 5, we see right here, verse 5. Yep. And in this month, Yahuwah executed his judgments on Sodom and Gomorrah and Zeboim and all the region of the Jordan, and he burned them with fire and brimstone and destroyed them until this day, even as I have declared unto thee all their works, that they were wicked and sinners exceedingly, and that they defile themselves and commit fornication in their flesh and work uncleanliness on the earth. So when I saw this, it looked to me like this is a division of things. And I'll tell you what it seemed like it was saying to me. I just want to get you guys' takes on this. So it says they were wicked and sinners exceedingly, and that they, so now we get into descriptive and a descriptive aspect of this, and that they defile themselves, 1, 2, commits fornication in their flesh, and then 3, work uncleanliness on the earth. And those 3 things, defile themselves, I see this as 3 different things. And what I see is defile themselves would be more of a private thing, right? Kind of an in secret, something I'm doing alone in private, trying to be hidden. Commit fornication in their flesh. This is more of a possibly still private situation, but maybe something you do with others, kind of like an adultery type situation, right? Commit fornication in their flesh, so with others, but possibly still in private. And then the work uncleanliness. This is something that's more of a public view, an open, maybe even influencing others with what they're doing. So that was just kind of what I got from that. What do you guys think?
Yeah, Kyle, I think that what you're making there is a pretty good point of just showing the depravity of the people in that area. Whenever an angel is speaking to Moses, he's trying to get Moses to understand why these things occurred and the reason behind it. One is a warning for any future generation. Hey, don't do this stuff, right? These are the things that get you the fire and brimstone. But also as an example of that this is what it takes to get this result. So, if you're walking in righteousness and you're not doing the things like you were saying, uncleanliness and fornication, these are things we're going to read about in the commands, right? So it's not like that the standard has changed at all. It's the same standard that all men are called to live by, but yet for whatever reason they had taken this to a level or to an extreme where the Father felt necessary to judge, like not wait until the afterlife, but in the current life, in the real world. And it was one of the things that, reading through it makes us look back into our own lives and say, where are we at and where do we stand? Are we walking the path leading us this direction? Or are we walking a path leading us in the right direction? And whenever we look at it that way, and when we kind of think of it from that perspective, it puts a lot more weight on our scriptures and the commands and the instructions that we have of do these things and you get all the benefits and blessings of an Abraham. Do the opposite and you get all the results of a Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And of course, those are at the maximum extreme, but I think sometimes we need that picture in our mind. And of course, they got the real life version there.
For me, Kyle, the defile themselves, I think that's what's being referenced in the book of Jude. Talks about them going after strange flesh. It is the mixture of pharmakia with developing chimeras, hybrids, manipulation of the flesh in order to create these things that we see in the region all the way up into the days of Deuteronomy and beyond.
Mm-hmm.
The fornication, I think that is pretty straightforward. That's licentiousness, that's sexual morality. That is why they tried to, they did what they did with Lot's daughters after they tried to do that to the angels that showed up. So that's their wanton lust, and both male or female, and all the the practices of Baal worship that would be going on in that region included all these behaviors as well. And then working on cleanness on the earth, to me, that and this is just speculation because I don't have a specific verse for this, but this would lend to the empiric collaboration. So this is why all 5 of these cities of the plain were destroyed. They're not just as a community doing this amongst themselves. There's trade agreements, there's human trafficking, there's all the things that are associated with the ways of Babylon. There's empire, desires, if you will. This is why they mustered a battle against the other 5 kings that Chedorlaomer brought against them in Jubilees chapter 13. So this is where it's not just simply this is a corrupt little tribe. No, they're extending their tentacles through trade and through the other machinations of deception to other peoples. So this is why not just the city of Sodom was destroyed, but all 5 cities were destroyed, in my opinion.
Okay, very cool. And then, go ahead, Joe.
No, I just wanted to. What do you think? What's your opinion on Ezekiel 16:49 as well, as far as judgment on Sodom? Well, it says in ESV, I'm doing that for my brother Jonathan. It says, "Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excessive food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and the needy." To me, that's if you go back to the definition of wicked, is causing others harm. Yeah, I think that's definitely causing people harm when you don't meet their actual needs, their everyday needs. So just kind of want to throw that one in there as well.
No, I love this because to me, this brings to mind James chapter 1, pure and undefiled religion, to take care of orphans, widows, and keep yourself uncorrupted from the world. Because in the Father's Torah, I mean, like, his whole temple was set apart for the widows, the orphans, and the poor, is to reallocate those resources with accountability so that people could be taken care of. And if you corrupt that process, you have just people, like just strangers visiting, and then they're suddenly trying to be raped by a bunch of men. So you're not taking, like, what happens if the stranger, like we see in the story of Lot, what happens if those strangers that showed up weren't angels, but they just were people seeking need? They're seeking help from the nearest large civilization. Instead, they were going to be abused. So that's to me, it seems like that is, mixing James's commentary on the Torah in that regard, and how the Torah was set up to where the Father's temple was the central point of all the tithing, the first fruits, and everything that happened at his feasts. It was to reallocate those provisions for people that were widowed, orphaned, or in need, the poor. Deuteronomy 15. So that's a huge deal. Like, that means the temple of God, like, that is the underlying context for God's house on the earth, is to take care of those in need. And if you're corrupting that process, that you're like the ultimate antithesis of what God wants on the earth.
Yeah.
And so if there's a civilization that does have that and they refuse to help, then there is accountability by the Most High. And this is such a great point, because it makes me think of how many in the modern day, it's almost as if the enemies figured out, okay, we can steal from people through corrupt banking means, through corrupt trade practices. We can acquire wealth for ourselves, but as long as we give back some to charity, maybe we'll stay off the judgment of the Most High longer. Because think about it, in every nation, it's always been a weird thing to me. It's like knowing when you see corrupt business practices of international corporations and governments, and you're like, how does God let them get away with this? And then you're like, you know what? They're giving billions and billions to charities, even though it's built in as a tax write-off for them and it's good for them financially. The Father's still going to use those good-hearted people running those charities for the most part. I know there's some corrupt charities out there, but for the most part, because there's good-hearted churches that get large donations from people. You know what I'm saying? That are anonymous. You know what I mean? So the point is, it makes me wonder if they've just tried to finagle a way to be like, all right, well, we've got all this wealth and this power and this control through corrupt means. How do we not get judged like them? Well, let's set up an institution where we're constantly giving to the poor. And then, it's what the Shriners do. It's what the Freemasons do. It's literally in their charters, is you've got to be a part of some sort of, charitable process, organization, or benefaction, so that you can help the community while they're constantly gaining control and deceiving the community. So I've always wondered why the dichotomy, and I think this is a great theory in my opinion. Yeah, because
Very
it's just like, what did the Assyrians do to stave off the judgment that Jonah proclaimed to them? We know they repented, but just put on sackcloth and ash is not what God qualifies as actual repentance. It's changing your behavior. Stop worshiping the false gods. Stop lying. Stop having unjust weights and measures. Stop, all the things that he reprimands the wicked for in the Old Testament. It's assumed if Assyria staved off judgment for approximately 100 years, well, they stopped doing those things. So, and then also, if we look in the book of Tobit, we see the same thing that Ezekiel 16:49 outlines, which is the exiles from the northern house of Israel were being persecuted, and they were in extreme poverty and being put upon, and hard for them to thrive. They weren't just being exterminated, because the ancient empires back then would take people and they would assimilate into their empire for usage. But there was like an open season on Jewish exiles or on Hebrew exiles, if you read the book of Tobit. And so another book that used to be in our edited American canon of 66. And so you see that the Assyrians were building judgment. And then Jonah comes in. It's even at the end of the book of Tobit. Tobit talks about how he knew that Nineveh finally did get its judgment, even though Jonah prophesied to them. And Tobit was happy to see the Assyrians finally later getting their judgment that Jonah had prophesied so long ago, even though they staved it off for approximately 100 years. And it's like, what did they do? What trade practices did they change? What they clearly stopped allowing people just to randomly kill Hebrew exiles, because that was happening at the beginning of the book of Tobit. So it's, that whole dichotomy there of like, all right, you're in power and control, but the Father's still going to have his hand to put a check on you. Otherwise, he's going to pull you out and remove you altogether. And that reminds me of Romans 13. The institutions of powers are put there, to do good. And if they don't, they're going to be judged. Now that could apply to both priests of Israel as well as kings and empires of the nations. And so I just think this whole idea, I guess, is one I'll stop ranting soon, but this whole idea is just, the average person can be scared when they realize the total power and control that the enemy has because of this collaboration of nations worldwide. Even though that's not a one world government yet, they still work in tandem as if it already is 99% of the time. So if the average person starts to look into this bird's eye view of politics across the nations and how Christians are persecuted in all these different countries and the Bible's banned in 52 different countries, and they start to feel like there's overwhelming odds, just remember these amazing moments here where the moment there is a line. And when these cultures step over that line, and these corrupt kings and rulers and emperors step over that line, Yahweh, who has more power than them, comes in and takes them out. So
Absolutely.
it's interesting. It's almost like Nebuchadnezzar ice skated on that line. And I mean that in a metaphor, because he was just given insanity for 7 years instead of being killed or replaced. And then, and guess who's in his court? Daniel. Following the Torah, exhibiting the wisdom of God, and it's my personal opinion that he actually ran the kingdom while Nebuchadnezzar was crazy for 7 years. But then it's unheard of that an emperor would go crazy and not be killed, for one, and then two, get to come back and assume power later.
Right.
While professing a different God. While now he comes back, he's got his mind back, and he comes back into rulership, and he's professing Yahweh and writing an edict with all the 127 provinces of Babylon to accept that they want to worship Yahweh. And it's like, that is unheard of. He would have been murked in a heartbeat. That is unheard of.
Right.
So there is this strange examples that we have. It's like a study unto itself of these different rulers of different empires that they either crossed the line, or they got to the limit, they backed down, or like in Nebuchadnezzar's case, he ran super thin on that line, and then finally was shown some grace by the Father to rule again, but to rule in a different way. So I'm sorry, guys, I'll stop on the tangent, but
No.
That's a
good.
line of thought that definitely needs to be explored. It needs to be thought of more. That's for sure. I think we can see that play out through all of history. I mean, we can see that playing out right now in our modern time. So
yeah,
it's
So I do love that.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, Joe, I really appreciate that Ezekiel mentioned, because it gives a much fuller context to how the Torah was being disobeyed in Sodom and Gomorrah and why judgment happened.
Awesome, brother.
Can you imagine trying to figure out where that line is? Well, why not just
It's when the
walk in his
angel's
ways?
finger, when the angel's finger shows up and starts writing on the wall.
It's a
Yeah.
small distinction.
And you it says your bowels went loose and you pooped yourself basically. That's when you hit that line.
Yeah, I don't like to play with fire, literally like that. So
Yeah.
okay, well, something that we saw in 16 through 20, and in our weekly studies that we've been doing, something that I think we all thought was really, really cool is we got to see something play out that we didn't expect. And I think we can see a lot of this stuff play out more and more throughout the scriptures as we read and as we look for these things. But I thought it was very, very cool to really see this stuff play out in chapter 16 through 20. We get to see Abraham express and live out Galatians 5:22. We get to see the fruit of the Spirit, and in order: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. Kindness is referenced in like 19:20, and then all into chapter 20, you've got goodness, and it's just so cool seeing the fruit of the Spirit played out in his life and through this testing that he's been going through. So I was just curious if you guys had any more take on any of that was going on.
No, I think you guys, pulling that out of the text and noticing that in the text was great. And I don't have anything to add to it. I think it's wonderfully appropriate. Yeah.
Yeah, I just enjoyed the fact that, we're kind of told to, not kind of, we are told directly to test the spirits, right? And to, inspect each other's and inspect the fruit. And so for that to pop out and for that to stand out in those verses and in these sections, it definitely, helped put more credence to what we're reading and some more validity to it. We want to see a similar message that's that string that we can pull that will take us back to the same place every time. And you don't want to read something and you pull on the string and there's nothing there, or you pull on the string and it's some nonsense. Here you start pulling on the fruit of the Spirit string and you're like, oh, this is going back to Abraham and some good stuff. And like Kyle said, in Galatians. So I always enjoy those common threads that are, placed throughout, because it's the same Spirit. We all worship in spirit and truth, and it's the same Spirit. It's not,
Right.
multiple different spirits and multiple different ways and directions and instructions. Oh, well, Moses had to do this and it's completely different for somebody else. So to see that walk out and play out exactly the same, just in a repetitive manner, to me, just put a lot more validity to it. And it really, made that black and white picture some more color for me.
Yeah,
Awesome.
for me as well. I was gonna say those particular chapters to me really brings out who Abraham is. We get so much more of his character, so much. I mean, and the fact that we got in 17, Mastema showing up and he's like proposing to Yahuwah. I think we need to put him through the test. Like,
That's a great point.
And here we go with a situation kind of like Job, where all of a sudden Mastema's having this conversation. The angel are present. He seems to kind of be in between both of these things happening at the same time. And but we know the rest of the story. We know that Abraham passed all of his tests. But to me, this was one of the bigger parts of his test. Was like, hey, by the way, that son that I promised you for all these years, you and your wife. Remember when she laughed? Right? Yeah. So you're gonna go kill him. And it was like, the amazing part of the story is Abraham gets up the next morning. He doesn't like kind of fiddle around or kind of like, maybe if I hold off long enough, God will change his mind. He said no.
Right.
Next morning, he got his wood. He got everything he needed for a sacrifice, and they went to go do that. So. But yeah, the whole thing of seeing his character play out in this just gives us so much more than what we get out of the book of Genesis. Again, nothing against Genesis. Yes, but I love the fact that we get that much more out of this and understanding who Abraham is. When we pick up in Genesis, we learn like he crosses over, some things happen. His wife's taken twice, tries to kill it or is going to kill his son, and then we kind of move on from that story. We don't get all the other little fillers in there of seeing the process of him from the age of 14. And that's the thing that blows my mind, is like, I didn't realize that this is happening to him at the age of 14, that this journey with Yahuwah is taking place, that's building this character, this relationship with the creator of everything, and that he's having these visitations from a young boy all the way up till we see him being a grown man and being a father and all these different things. I just, to me, I that's one of the things I pull away from these chapters with him that I love the most, is just seeing, I feel like I see Abraham. That's what I feel.
I think it's also important that Jubilees shows us something Genesis doesn't, and that is that Satan is the one, just like in the book of Job, Satan goes before God and says, we should tempt him with this, test him with this. And so that's important, because how many atheists come up and say, well, look, God's asking him to kill his son.
Right.
God does endorse human sacrifice. And you're like, no, it was the whole thing was just, so this is more in line with what Hebrews chapter 11 says, where it says Abraham was tested. Not that Abraham was instructed to do this as an eternal ordinance.
Right.
This isn't the righteousness of God. The idea came from Satan. And that's consistent with what Satan does with people worship him, is they give their firstborn to him, and that's not consistent with what Yahweh does. So it's like, makes you just wonder at this point in Abraham's life if he kind of knew this was a test. It's just because Hebrews says his mindset was he knew that God would just raise Isaac up.
Right.
So
and
it's
he does tell his son, he's like, Father, where's the lamb? He says the Father will provide. So that to me is a little bit of like, he goes, hey, everything's gonna be fine.
Yep.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I also love this chapter because in my opinion, it runs against false doctrines of Judaism. And that is, they put this importance on the seed of Jacob, specifically to the time of Moses. And they try to demonize the seed of Esau or the seed of Ishmael. They think they're not worthy, basically. But we've got God protecting and blossoming Ishmael here.
Yep.
And we're going to see up until the death of Abraham that Ishmael is part of the story. And he's blessed, and he's doing the commandments, and he's teaching his kids to do the commandments. So that's an important thing, and that's not acknowledged by Judaism. So,
well, it's not acknowledged through most of Christendom, because that's where we get our understanding, is through the lens of that
false
scripture.
lens.
That false lens, that limited view of scripture that we've been shown from them. So it's a sad thing. Very sad thing. Yeah, I think there's a lot more to that we could see. We know ultimately what plays out with Ishmael, and how things go from there. But I think there's a lot that we can learn from this before that happened, right? That we don't get to in the canon of 66, really.
Yeah, without the book of Jubilees, I would not be able to confidently say that Jubilees teaches us that we will see Ishmael in the kingdom. He was taught the commandments by Abraham, and he kept them, even when he separated and became his own man with his own kids and grandkids. So he kept the commandments. We're going to see here in later chapters, like he brings his children to Abraham to be taught the commandments, or to Isaac, one of the two. So I think we'll see him in the kingdom.
Well, I do think, let me bring up this right here, just to kind of finish up what I was talking on the fruit of the Spirit and stuff here. I think there's a lot that we can get. I urge you guys, if you are not reading and studying the book of Jubilees, you definitely should. There's so much that can be learned from this, where we can see how these trials that Abraham was going through, how it applies to our lives today. Almost cyclical, same forms and fashion. I mean, are we asked to go sacrifice our children? Probably not, but we do go through these trials, and at least this, we can get more of an understanding as to the heart that we are supposed to have, the mindset that we are supposed to have, and the actions that we are to take in our trials and tribulations. And I know that this has personally helped me in my walk, understanding these things.
Mhm.
And this particular passage right here in chapter 19, verse 8, just means so much to me. It says, "This is the 10th trial wherein Abraham was tried, and he was found faithful, patient in spirit."
Mhm.
There's
Awesome.
so much depth to that, and man, we need to apply that to our lives.
Yeah, that is awesome. Yeah, I love 18 just doesn't stop with the good stuff. It just gives you more. Abraham now, because he ascends Zion, the hill to where Isaac is going to be offered. Um, I just love that the word Zion, I mean, that they names it the hill that
Mm,
where the Lord is seen, and you guys, I'm keeping in context. We talk about the coming kingdom of God all the time, and Zion is the new Jerusalem that comes down out of heaven. Now, this is referencing a mountain called Zion, a hilltop called Zion. But what's interesting is that from the mountain of the Lord that comes down out of heaven, called the New Jerusalem, also called Zion, the Lord will be able to see all things on the earth over the governance of mankind on all nations. So I just think it's a beautiful parallel to this mountain where the Lord is seen. Um, and the Lord Yahweh will reign from Zion through his son Yeshua
Mm.
as king of the nations and the
right.
high priest of the covenant. And so that's just a beautiful parallel here to Isaac um, being on this mountain as the sacrifice, and Yeshua was our sacrifice as well. So just a lot of fun, amazing parallels here, a lot of relevance.
Yeah, we got to play around when we were doing our weekly study on this. We got to play around a little bit with the mounts, Mount Zion, Mount of Olives, and then off in the distance you also have Mount Hermon,
Mhm.
however you want to pronounce that. So I think that looking at that from a overhead view, just seeing where everything's at, there's going to be an interesting dynamic play out in that area.
For
Now,
sure.
there is the viewpoint that Zion is the North Pole area. You have any thoughts on that?
I disagree.
Disagree? Okay.
Yeah, I disagree. I know that I think that was one of Rob Skiba's final theories, but I disagree heavily. Um, I don't think that the North Pole has a magnetic mountain. Personally, I don't see any evidence for it. I know some people try to theorize it. I don't see. The verses I've seen people try to use to support that theory. I don't think that that's the context of those verses personally. But there's different arguments that come towards that. So I can't break each one down for you because I don't know which one you're pulling from. But ultimately, I just think that they're literally not just according to this book here, but other passages. Literally, there was a hilltop called Zion, but the mountain of the Lord that comes down out of heaven, Abraham never saw it. This is what Hebrews 11 directly tells us. He waited for a city whose architect and builder was God, a heavenly country. Even while he was, verse 10 of Hebrews 11:10, while he was sojourning in the land that he would later inherit.
Right.
So I think it's important to remember, put all the details together of the promised kingdom to come that comes down out of heaven to sit down on this land that was promised to Abraham between the Euphrates and the Nile. Abraham's never seen it. Noah didn't see it. Well, yeah, actually, Noah did see it. Abraham never saw it. Let's put it like that.
All right.
Because
Yeah.
we think, or at least me personally, and it's okay if you guys disagree, but we believe and we teach emphatically in our channel with lots of different scriptures that the Garden of Eden returns as Zion, as the heavenly country that comes down out of heaven. It's the paradise of God. And so Noah would have seen it because it was retracted from the earth during the flood, in my opinion.
Now, I can't speak for these two guys, but I know for myself, I'm of the same ilk. I believe that as well. But as far as is there something at the North Pole? Is there a magnetic mountain up there? I don't know. It is very interesting to kind of explore the ideas and concepts. And when we covered this in our video, we even shown something that somebody had out there on the internet that was supposedly video footage of it. And how the wind goes around the specific area. So, I mean, it's neat to have as an idea, but
Well,
I'm not saying there can't be something there, but I don't think
right.
it's the promised Zion coming down out of heaven.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that when it's all said and done, if we're given the privilege and shown, there's gonna be a lot of places in what we live on today we call Earth. There's
Yeah.
gonna be a lot of places I think that are revealed that were hidden from us when it's all said and done. That's my personal opinion.
Probably so.
Guys, I'm the weirdo that thinks there's an entire continent south of Hawaii.
Yeah,
That's not
well,
on maps.
Admiral Byrd said in his interview that there was a whole other continent the size of the United States that was full of coal and everything else and its abundance, and then nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
Wait, as in like, well, you say continent, so, but
So like pull up a map, pull up even an FE map or an AE map, and then look where Hawaii is.
all right.
To me, there's just too much ocean.
Too
It would
much
just make
ocean.
a lot more. Yeah, it'd make a lot more sense if there was actual land there.
All right, here we go.
The top of this circle is where Hawaii is. Yeah, you're right on Hawaii. So everything to all that area, yeah, I think there's something out. So there's more land out there.
I wouldn't doubt it. Just out of view from Hawaii, but
Right. You wouldn't be able to see it from Hawaii, but too much atmospheric vapor over the waters. That becomes a lensing effect. You wouldn't be able to see that far unless you had some sort of high altitude infrared, but no one's ever done it facing that way from Hawaii. But yeah, I would want to explore there. And of course, you guys know that the GPS system is controlled by the government. So if you're in a boat and you're trying to sail that way, I mean, they're going to just direct you. Your GPS will direct you.
Well, they will either redirect you with GPS or another ship will show up and say,
Or, yeah.
"You need to turn around right now."
That's right.
Right.
And there's been, not in this particular waters, but there has been other places on the earth and other that documented, innocent minded non-FE people that have said, why is we're trying to sail this way off the coast of New Zealand, but suddenly the Navy shows up. Why? We aren't doing anything.
Yeah,
Like, well,
you got to turn around.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Okay. All right. What else we got, boys?
It seems like in chapter 18, at the very end of the chapter, it seems like he's celebrating unleavened bread. It's a 7-day festival right after. So it seems like he's celebrating unleavened bread. And it would make perfect sense if, this whole event happened at the beginning of the festival. And if you do look at the beginning of the chapter and you do like the math from chapter 17 and 18, as far as what days of the year this is, it seems like it's in the third or the first month.
Yeah, which would make sense if a lot of people believing that Isaac's life mirrored or was a foreshadowing of Yeshua. So
yeah,
that would definitely make sense.
Yeah.
And there's in my opinion, like you joked earlier, Kyle, a lot of different people have different interpretations for the feasts and how those will be, relevant. And in my opinion, the first resurrection is the great Passover that Isaiah 30 talks about. And it happens leading up to the literal Passover. And this is where I think it's in the Septuagint, but you go into Jeremiah 31 verse 7, and it talks about Yahweh gathering all nations for the Passover. So it would make perfect sense to me if this test coincided with him, celebrating this feast of joy after he, supposedly receives Isaac back, metaphorically receives Isaac back, and he celebrates this because this is like Hebrews 11 says, it's Abraham thought resurrection was going to take place anyway. So this would make perfect sense to coincide with the resurrection and of the first resurrection of the second coming, and then all the people. The wedding supper of the Lamb is, in my opinion, that is the Passover. It's the unleavened bread meal. It's the feast of the Lord. That's my take on it. It's my hot take.
Maybe not a highly debated topic or often thought of topic, but just out of curiosity, I'd like to get your take on this. Because I'm of the understanding, I think we all are of the understanding that the feast days have been eternally celebrated in the heavenlies. Always have since the beginning of time, right? Like this. The reason why the heavenlies were put in place was so that we could observe when to do those things that were being done, right? Essentially.
That's right.
Why was Abraham the first one to observe this?
Not unleavened bread, but it says Sukkot, and I don't know.
Sukkot, yeah.
And I don't know. because we got Noah celebrating Shavuot, back in
Mhm.
Jubilee 6. So I honestly don't know. And
Okay.
I also got you got, I think it's First Enoch 83. It talks about Methuselah teaching his sons the feasts of the Lord, festivals of the Lord. Yeah. So,
Just a head scratcher
never
on that
know.
one, huh? Okay.
Well, it's like how do I say this? If I look at the time period of the years before the flood leading up to the flood, you could teach your children that, hey, this is what Yahweh does, but do they have the ability to go carry it out? I mean, living in a world of chaos, who knows?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, what is the consistent thing we've seen all throughout history? Is that every time someone tries to actually observe in peace the ways of Yahweh, the enemy comes in to invade them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
is that
something to
what's
consider.
meant by the days of Noah returning?
Oh, I don't know. What do you mean by that more? What are you saying?
Well, there's there's the highly talked about topic of it'll be as the days of Noah and the end
Oh, the
days.
coming of the Son of Man.
Yeah.
I think the specific I do believe that there's some metaphoric reference, some comparative reference, I should say, with how wickedness increases, the love of many go cold, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that specific moment that Christ is saying that, he's talking about the immediacy of it, because he's talking about people eating and drinking, and the flood came and swept them away.
Right.
In the same way, Matthew 29 says, or Matthew 24, it says about the coming of the Son of Man be like lightning flashing from the east to the west. So I think he's talking about like the speed of which he actually shows up in the sky.
Okay.
It's gonna be very quickly, but yeah, there'll be plenty of birth pangs and signs leading up to that will mimic the wickedness that we see in the days of Noah.
All right.
And in my opinion, that will include the return of giants and chimeras.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's what the whole trans movement is all about, is prepping the cultures for accepting chimeras.
I definitely haven't ruled it out. I'm back and forth where I stand on all that, but I definitely haven't ruled it out. So
yeah, I think our grandkids are going to have a wild experience in this life.
the every time I think I've got something figured out, it always keeps brought back to mind that the deception will be so great that if possible, even the very elect would be deceived. So it's
right.
like, every time I think I've got something figured out, I'm like, okay, what else, what could be the deception leading me to this thought? I don't know.
Yeah, if the elites, if the quote unquote elites who have publicly stated what I'm about to say, if they could have their way within 50 years, they'll have a specific class of mankind, specifically an elite class, living in the air in floating cities, worshiping the floating sphere.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll have transhumanistic ideas happening to where you're part cyborg, part man. You got replaceable parts. They're lying to people simultaneously that you can upload your consciousness to a computer, which really just will kill them. And
Eternal
then
life.
an unclean spirit will take over that avatar body that they've created for you. And so that, like, they would have, that would be their wet dream future would be, you have a slave class on the ground living in poverty. You have elites in the air that are engaged in various forms of transhumanism. And Satan has literally revealed himself again, not by that name, of course, but he's the traveler, he's the progenitor, he's the panspermia that returns to the earth, that all mankind worships as the first origin of mankind, according to the heliocentric panspermia narrative. And yeah, they would have complete autonomous control, both politically and financially. And so that's their wet dream of a future. That's what they've publicly stated that they want. Not the sphere Satan part. That's me putting all the puzzle pieces together. But
Right.
But everything else involved, like, that's what they would like to have in the next 50 years, is how they would have total control over all things, all goods produced, all types of education being had. Your total lifespan is mapped out for you. It's like a strange mixture of Elysium and District 9 and Gattaca, if you've ever seen those movies.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-mm-mm.
Yeah,
So
you'll be able to genetically manipulate your offspring. They can have any height, hair color, eyes you want. And at the same time, they'll tell you when you die.
Hmm.
And they'll give you a choice. Do you want to become an android and live longer, or do you want to do you upload your consciousness into an avatar body and be, a useful cog in the wheel? But ultimately, I think that's just a Logan's Run deception. If anyone knows that deep cut, where basically they're just killing you and then telling your family that they're uploading your consciousness with very slick, very, very slick, advanced AI that just mimics who you were. Yeah.
And these are just a few of the topics that you can explore by studying Jubilees.
Yeah.
You got to dig into this book.
This is it's all been done before. Ecclesiastes 1:9 is not a throwaway verse, guys. It's all been done before.
That's right.
Nope.
That's right. All right.
Yeah,
What
I
else
wanted
you
to-
guys? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, what I was gonna do is actually take us into chapter 19, because it actually kind of falls into this spiritual realm and where the world would like to see us go versus where the Father would like us to go. And in chapter 19, starting in verse 28, I'm actually going to read these two verses. And it says,
Verse 20 what?
28 and 29.
Okay.
And the spirits of Mastema shall not rule over thee or over thy seed to turn thee from Yahuwah, who is thy Elohim from henceforth forever. And may Yahuwah Elohim be an Abba to thee, and thou the firstborn son, and to the people always. Go in peace, my son. So yeah, we're like looking at this idea of like all the elites and the way the world wants us to go and all the negative in the world. And we can see it's coming from the adversary, the Satan, the Mastema, all of that. And it says he's not going to rule over thee. Like he's the entity of the bad guy is real, but he's not going to rule over you. I'm going to rule over you. And I love that it goes into it. And this is the first mention that I know of in 29 where it says, and Elohim will be an Abba to thee. So now we're getting that word of like actual father. And that's changing this whole conversation and dynamic. Because now, like I said, we talked about Abraham taking, I know there is a creator. We talked about that earlier. And then now he's like, well, I know he's my God. And now he's saying, man, he's like a father to me. Like I literally hold him as like my earthly parental guidance father. And that relationship is one that would have been known by all of them. The whole conversation here is the patriarchs. One's a father to another that's a father. You have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. All these characters are playing a role here. He's saying, now the Father in heaven is going to be known as your father. And it's just it's so awesome to see, like you see the bad on one side and you see the good on the other side, and you see like which one's good and which one's bad, which one's negative and which one's positive. And it was just such an awesome read right there of taking that relationship one step further into a very, very personal relationship, as if it was your own earthly father.
Amen.
You guys remember that I did a recent debate, and my debate opponent was trying to challenge me on the use of the word father in the Torah. And I brought up Deuteronomy 32 because he was like, oh, it's not talking about Yahweh God and Deuteronomy when it's talking about do the commandments of the Lord. I was like, yeah, it's talking about Yahweh the Father. And he's like, show me the word father. And I showed him, and he didn't have much to say after that. But had we already had Jubilees, you have it right here, which I think is amazing. Same thing for Jubilees chapter 1, verse 22. I know you guys already reviewed it, but I'm amazed by it because it's just like, he's just trying to reassure them that, teach them these commandments and teach them that I love them. And that's something that, that warmth you don't always get from Genesis and Exodus. That Yahweh, your father, loves you. Consider him a father who loves you. And this is why he's asking you to do his behaviors. Yeah.
Go into what you were saying there in verse 28 and 29 too. When I read that, this very last statement, go in peace, my son, it reminds me so much of Matthew 24, when the disciples are asking Yeshua, what's going to happen? What's the sign of your coming? All that kind of good stuff, right? And he says, truly I say unto thee, excuse me, let me skip down. I apologize. We're looking at verse 4, I think. Okay. And Jesus answered them, see that no man lead you astray. And he goes into some details or whatever. And then he says right here in verse 6, see that you are not alarmed. And, different versions read that differently, but see that you be not troubled, that sort of stuff. And it just reminded me so much of that when I read this. Go in peace, my son. So he's telling us, like, these are the things this is going to happen, but that's not for you. Go in peace, my son. right?
Mm-hmm.
And going back to the example that we gave earlier about Abraham and his testing, him being tested, right? It's that what was being tested? Was he being tested in the sense that would he obey? I think that's part of it, but he was also being tested in his heart, in his spirit. Like, was he trusting? Because we have this idea in our mindset of following the Most High. We are supposed to worship in spirit and in truth, but the Shema itself, we are to trust and obey,
Mhm.
right? That's what it means to believe. We are to trust and obey. And so it's not just obedience, it's trusting that his plan will prevail, knowing what is going to happen, knowing the outcome, knowing how he's going to deal with us, how he provides and protects. And we just have to walk these things out and trust that he's going to handle it. I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, amen. I definitely agree with that. Yeah, one last thing in 19 I wanted to point out here is that the barrel of Sarah. I know that in your guys' regular cover video, you guys talked about the patience, that this is one of the tests, and I think you guys did a really good job bringing out all the things on that. One of the things that I love about this moment is it says that he knew that the rumor in the land was that this land was already given to him, but he still was willing to pay the price and buy it and go through the motions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that specific wording that there was a rumor in the land that this land was given to Abraham, that's amazing. We don't see that in Genesis, but you do see it spoken of in Josephus's writings about the histories of the Jews. And I think it's in Antiquities of the Jews. And he talks about how when remember the promise to Abraham was that after 400 years, I'll bring your descendants up out of bondage and bring back into this land. But the sin of the Amorites is not yet full. So Josephus talks about when the Israelites came out of Exodus and wandered in the desert for 40 years, and then were crossing the Jordan so they could go into the land. The first city they faced was Jericho. The reason why Jericho was fortified was because they knew the Israelites were coming back. Josephus talks about how all the cities that Joshua ended up taking back over, that they had spent that whole 400 years fortifying their positions in their cities, that before that their cities weren't walled off. For 400 years, they knew this was the children of Shem's land, because they knew like Jubilees 8 says, Canaan wasn't given this land, but the Canaanites were there by sedition. And they knew the penalty for that was death, which means if you're not leaving that land, someone's going to come kill you and root you out of it. You're going to get evicted violently, right? So like they knew what they were doing. They knew. And like this is why they were fortifying their cities, anticipating the children of Israel to come back.
Wow.
Great insight on that.
Well, you get with in Joshua and Rahab, she used the term, our hearts melted when we heard of what you did.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And she was willing to join with the winners.
She was smart.
She saved her and her household. It's amazing. Like, but to have that background context gives a lot more reasoning to her decision. Because they all kind of, there's some being stubborn, and there's others who are, they're not agreeing with the stubbornness of their leaders. They're still on the fence. She's just a prostitute in the walls. No, I don't mean that as derogatorily as it sounded, but she's not in a position of leadership, making international, trade decisions with the confederacy of the Amorites. She's just a cog in the wall, literally. no pun intended. She's just a person in the wall that was like, oh, you know what? I don't know if I agree with their leaders. These guys, the rumor is that this was given to them anyway. So if their God has been doing this, bringing them out of Egypt, that's sign number one. We got us shaking in our boots over that. Then they went over and took care of Og and Bashan and all that. And like, that's sign number two. Like, and here they are staring at us. Like, I don't know. So even a prostitute can pick up what the Father's putting down when it comes to like prophecies being fulfilled. You know what I mean? And it's just like, and she saw the signs and she was like, you know what? I'm going to get out of this wall and I'm going to go live amongst the people, amongst the chosen people who she still got to stay in the land. That's crazy. But she just covenanted with Israel in faith and belief in order to do that.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's really wild. So basically, like when we see, what was it? The city of who was this? Who was the tribe? Was it Ai? Who was the tribe that tried to fool Joshua by, making their bread look moldy and their shoes worn, and they said we traveled from a great place and want to strike a peace bargain with you. It's in like Joshua chapter 7 or 8, and he fools Joshua into this bargain, but they were just an Amorite clan that was living there again because they knew what they were doing. And this is the part I think that the average person, especially the atheists and agnostics, when they look at the conquest of Canaan and the Israelites being told to go in and root all these clans out, and they're like, how unfair is that for Yahweh to tell them to go do that? Those Canaanites weren't doing anything to them. If they had the book of Jubilees, they would have known the backstory. They would have known that these people took this land by death and murder, and that they weren't supposed to have this, and that this was just long-standing retribution by Yahweh.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot here. This book's amazing.
There is a lot. Okay, well, one book we have not really discussed is 20, or one chapter, I should say. I know you've got to go like very, very soon. So is there any specific hot point that y'all want to hit in 20 to you guys? I can't think of anything right off the top of my head.
Real quick, I just want to point out that Abraham teaches Isaac, Ishmael, and all of their sons and grandsons the commandments of Yahweh in this chapter. And while he's giving out his gifts of inheritances, he gives them to all the children and grandchildren. That's including Ishmael's kids and the children of Keturah.
Yep.
So this means that he is fulfilling the Torah for a righteous man who leaves an inheritance to his children and his children's children. Even though the narrative in Genesis would lead you to believe that he doesn't even talk to Ishmael anymore.
Right.
That's not true.
Yeah, as soon as he sent him and the mom away, that was the last time they ever interacted with one another.
And I've heard people try to bring a case against Abraham saying that he was unrighteous and didn't follow Torah because he abandoned Ishmael. And I'm like, no, if we had the book of Jubilees, we'll see that he's literally up to the day of his death. He's honoring Ishmael and the grandchildren from Ishmael.
And that's something as me as a grandfather, I want to say it touches my heart. And I see the blessing that Abraham gets in his life. This is truly a blessing to speak to your children and your grandchildren to, and I believe in the power of the spoken word. I really do. I believe that when he spoke these things, it really meant something more than what people today with their spoken words. Okay. The blessing in this, that he sacrificed everything he did. He did send away Ishmael and his mother away, but we see that the father still honored that and that he continues this relationship with his son. As it says clearly in Jubilees, he loved Ishmael. It wasn't like, well, you're second best and good luck on life and hope everything works out for you. Here's some bread and water and hope you make it. No, it grieved him for that to take place. But to me, this part right here is a blessing to me from Yahuwah to him. He's like, hey, by the way, here's your blessing. And before you leave, you're going to be able to speak to all your children and your grandchildren and then go pass over to the other side in peace. I love that about the story in chapter 20.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think what we see here and why chapter 20 was so impactful for me is, you're reading it almost as if it's a retelling of the law, like we would see in Deuteronomy, but also a very similar format as to the 12 patriarchs, right? It's their last will, their last testimony, the last things that Abraham decided to give his, as you brought up, Sean, his all his family, all his descendants. He said, everybody gather around, let me tell you something. And what he decided to take, could have told him anything, like the sky's blue, trees are green, the days are awesome. But instead, he said, what is the most important, most impactful thing I can leave you with? And I think verse 7 hits the nail on the head there. And it says, I implore you, my sons, love the Elohim of heaven and cleave ye to all his commandments. And that's almost exactly verbatim what we're going to read in Revelation. It says, keep the testimony of Jesus, Yeshua, and keep the commands, right? So this is, almost a word for word verbatim statement out of here. And so this is Abraham's last words, his last things he wants to leave his children, his most loved possession is follow the Father, follow Elohim, and keep all his commands. This is the way of righteousness. This is what got me to the place that I am today and why I'm successful and why I've been able to be the man, the father, the grandfather, the husband that I have been, is because I followed this principle. And so he goes through and tells them a little bit about, what are the hot topic things. Of course, he didn't break down every bit of every part of every law, but he hit them with the hot topic things that they would have understood and recognized and the ways to keep them out of trouble. And as he's doing that, like I said, what better thing to do than to leave your family with wisdom and parting gifts? And that's the last that we hear of Abraham. And this is, a little bit bittersweet, of course, because Abraham's been such a vital part of our last, 10 chapters of reading, just building up this man, this great character, the original patriarch, right? For the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's the guy. And we've got to watch his life play out in a grand scale, a grand screen, where we get to watch all these little minute details and how they impacted him, everybody around him. And like we talked about, even the world around him had rumors of who Abraham was and what he was about. And let us have that kind of character and that kind of impact, not only in our own lives, our families' lives, but in all around us.
So yeah, the story that's being told in the book of Jubilees is so different from what we are taught in Christendom. A different picture is painted. Let me rephrase that. The story is the same, but there's more detail that gives you a deeper understanding, a more true understanding of what's actually transpiring here, that holds to the character of Abraham, that holds to the character of the Most High. Whereas we don't necessarily see that in the canonized 66 Masoretic. With that, guys, we're gonna get out of here. Sean, we thank you, brother, for joining us so much, man. We really appreciate you and all your amazing insight. God bless you. And guys, we will see you next time. God bless.
Hello.